Hey guys, I just wanted to do this quick voiceover for this Freehold 25 that I did with my guildies last night. Just a couple things before we get started. I'll put my talents, my gear, my essences, and everything in the description. So if you're looking for any of that, it'll be down there. Okay, let's get into it. So at the very beginning here, we make a slight mistake. As you can see, our tank runs forward there. If you were doing this without a Blood Death Knight, you would want to all stay stacked and not move. But because he's a Blood Death Knight, it's not such a big deal because he has Mass Grip to pull all the mobs together. The thing is, if you're going to do a 3-pack like this, you want all the mobs close, and it's easier if you just don't move because the middle pack there doesn't start moving until one of you guys moves forward. So if you wait until the key starts before you move, that middle pack, you can catch them like on the stairs on their way down rather than way out in front, and it's easier to group them up. So this is basically, we're just, blasting into this 3-pack. We want to try and keep everything even because it's bolstering. As you can see, there's a high Corsair right there that I'm targeting. As far as what I'm doing, I just got bit by the dog right there. That's a positioning mistake on my part. Those dogs will bite people who are close to them. I was standing close so that the Corsairs don't jump away, because that's a problem on these bolstering weeks. As you can see, the Corsairs are still really high. So they were having me stand close, but I stood too close, I guess, and I got bit by the dog. So that's something to look out for. Don't stand too close to those dogs, because they'll bite. Anyway, so now I don't have my food buff. Right here, we're going to snap all the Mind Rend tentacles up. So you want to get on top of these stairs as quickly as possible. Then you all want to stack right here, like we're doing. And then the Mind Rend tentacles will snap up, and then you can have an easier time burning them down. It's not such a huge deal for Shadow Priests, because Shadow Priests handle these Mind Rend tentacles pretty well if they're spread out even. But obviously the other two classes that we're running, a Fire Mage and a Havoc Demon Hunter, are going to want them close together, so it makes it easier. I'm focusing the majority of my damage here into the blood of the Corruptor, because the Fire Mage is going to combust all of the Mind Flay tentacles and basically kill them himself, so we don't really need to do too much to those. He's doing 200k DPS, so it worked out. As you just saw, I have a weak aura that tells me when to use my focused azerite beam. Basically, it's just whenever my crit is above 100% and my beam is off cooldown, that weak aura pops up. So it's not 100% of the time you want to use it right then, but it's good to know when your crit is over 100%, because your beam will crit based on your crit percentage. So that's why the beam is so strong on Shadow Priest, is because you can guarantee every beam usage at over 100% crit. So right now we're just finishing up this Blood of the Corruptor. We're going to go out and pull this 4-pack right here with the 2 Mastiffs and the Enforcers, I think they're called. Yeah. So right here, again, we're going to want to stand kind of close, because the Enforcers throw the tank. And in a higher key like this, you're going to want as much uptime on the mobs as you can. So we don't want our tank to be thrown far away, because then 1, he can't death strike to keep himself alive, and 2, he does less damage because he's not, hitting anything. You got to be really careful and watch for these brutal backhands that these Enforcers are doing. Right here I get hit by one because I wasn't paying attention. So that's my 2nd death already. So not a great start for me. That's one of the problems with standing in melee like that, is some mechanics that you don't typically watch for, like those brutal backhands. On a lower key, I would not be looking for those at all, because I'm far enough away that they're never going to hit me. But in a higher key like this, where we need a stack, I need to pay more attention to those brutal backhands so that I don't get smacked. It's really embarrassing to get hit by one of those as a ranged player, because you don't have to be close. Anyway, that's the Shattering Toss that just happened. We want to try and minimize how far he gets thrown with those, just so that we have uptime, like I was saying. Other than that, you want to kill the Mastiffs first, I guess, because when they enrage and they're bolstered, they do a lot of damage. Right here, I'm getting my food buff, if I can, before the boss starts, because the food buff is huge. A lot of people I guess, don't put a huge priority on food buff, but for me, I try to get it. Anytime you may have a 10-second break and you don't have food buff, you should always be popping food, in my opinion. So, I mean, it's just a straight bonus, Why wouldn't you want a food buff? Anyway, so right here we're all stacking close for Sky Captain Crag because this blue icon that we have on the ground, if you get him to dismount from his bird while he's on that blue icon, it gives you a really nice cycle for the dive bombs and the vile bombardments. So we're trying to get him to leave his bird as fast as possible on top of that square, because while he's on the bird, as you can see, he's shooting those like powder shot things basically that just completely obliterate us. Anyway, so I just got hit by another one. I'm almost dead. We finally got him off his bird. So now we back off and we split into our vile bombardment bait positions. And we actually, this boss, we really screwed up the bird. So typically he would do that. He would poop on me and then he'd go poop on the other guy. But something went weird and we had like really weird dive bombs going on. This is how it should look, the dive bomb across right there. But as you'll see in the future, we get some weird dive bombs that, like, one goes right towards the tank, stuff like that. I pop Vampiric Embrace right here because we have those Azerite powder shots going into our Death Knight, and we're trying to dodge them with our Demon Hunter. He's trying to line of sight them, but whether or not that actually happens, I mean, I don't know, so I'm just trying to help out when I can. Plus, there's not really a better time to use Vampiric Embrace in the next 2 minutes, 3 minutes. So, may as well use it right here, especially because this boss is pretty dangerous. He's got a lot of really painful mechanics. So here comes one of the bad birds. Oh, that's a good bird. Yeah, so basically for this fight, we're just trying to outrange the powder shots, bait the bird poop, and then just do as much damage as we can. Right there, I was waiting to use my Azerite beam for right after his powder shot went off. As you can see, I have that ability countdown thingy, and I was watching that so that I don't run up and beam and get blasted in the face. So if you want to wait until he shoots his thing, and then you can run in and use your beam. So, see right there, we just got a Vile Bombardment on top of the boss. That's something we never want, but that's just because we had weird bird cycle going on. So that's Sky Captain Crag. Not super hard. Definitely a dangerous boss, but there's some good ways to play around it. Right here we're going to do a mage skip. So our mage will pull this enforcer, we wait, and then we run by, and then the mage will will pop Greater Invis and reset the enforcer and come with us. So that's just an easy way to skip that enforcer that we don't need. Up here, we were gonna do 2 trappers at the same time, but that ended up not happening. Our Death Knight pops Purgatory there. I think that was avoidable, but I don't know. So right here, just like a basic trash pack, you want to make sure you're interrupting the oarsman. We have our Fire Mage is combusting into the oarsman, so I'm targeting something else. These duelist dashes are pretty important to avoid, but if you have any kind of stuns going out on those, you can stop them. You can stun it with your Psychic Horror, you can even Psychic Scream it, but it's usually the melee or your tank take care of that, so it's not a huge deal. I have that weak aura that's telling me to use my Shadow Fiend. That one just triggers whenever I have more than 30 stacks of Void Form rolling, and I have Shadow Fiend off cooldown. Shadow Fiend is not a huge cooldown, so you shouldn't feel too bad about using it on trash rather than bosses, especially on a fortified week. But even on a non-fortified week, even if it's tyrannical, it's not a huge deal if you pop your Shadow Fiend on trash, because it just doesn't do a ton of damage. I got hit by one of those going bananas right there, so that's something you want to avoid, is standing too close to the, what are those guys called? The Bilge-Rat Brutes, maybe? Somebody. Yeah, it's the Bilge-Rat, whatever that guy is. Buccaneers. Bilge-Rat Buccaneers. They do going bananas You want to avoid that. If you're ranged, obviously, just stand at ranged. There's no reason to be standing in melee for this fight. Right, so I guess some of the things that I'm doing, like mechanically, you want to dot everything, and then after that, pop VE whenever you feel like. So you don't want to pop VE just to pop VE. You want to use it for a reason. And you also want to use Vampiric Embrace when you can actually do damage, because the healing you get from it is tied directly to your damage. Something I should mention that I just did is I intentionally dropped Void Form right there. So I was at like 40 something stacks. I could have gone up to like 50, 52 or so, but I stopped attacking so that I could drop Void Form and get my Course of Insanity stacks, because then my crit goes sky high, like it's still at 130%, and it just lets you do way more damage. So in a pack like that, where you have 6 or 7 mobs that are going to live a while, it's worth it to get a decently high Void Form and then drop it intentionally before you go, rather than just keeping your Void Form as high as possible, because you get more out of your Course of Insanity stacks than you do from like the extra 5 Void Form stacks. Okay, so right here we're going to combust into this double pack in Pop Lust. This is a pretty dangerous pull. You got a lot of going bananas, you got some Frost Blasts you need to avoid. You have Blind Rages that are going out, that Shattering Bellow, which will interrupt the casters. We have 2 casters, so that's a really big deal. That Frost Blast gets off. Luckily I dodge it, but it hits our Mage and our Demon Hunter. They're fine, but that's something that you want to avoid. Those Frost Blasts can be really dangerous at these higher levels. Other than that, we're just burning everything down. I dotted everything as fast as I could, and now I'm just popping Void Bolt and Mind Seer as much as I can. In a pack like this, where it's like 10 plus mobs, Mind Seer is pretty valuable. You don't really need to cast Shadow Word Void as often as you would. Like, it's fine to cap at 2 for a little bit to get a longer Mind Seer off. Our tank actually goes down right here, because these guys are like 7 times bolstered and just pounding. Our Demon Hunter has threat though, so I'm good to beam him and we can finish that off. We're trying to res him. Something I should mention right here, as a Shadow Priest you have really high haste. If you look, my cast for my res is way faster than our Holy Paladin. She started before I did, but mine ended first because I have such high haste. So if you're trying to time a key that's really hard and somebody dies and you just dropped combat, it's usually worth it for you to res rather than your healer, because your res is faster. And if you really need to save time, then you should use yours. Really, even if you don't need to save time, you should use yours because it's faster, right? Anyway, so right here, we're just going into we're doing the RP pack as well as the Trapper. And we have some Blind Rages that we gotta watch. These traps are super deadly. Our Mage ends up getting hit by a couple of these. Like this one right here, he gets hit by. He manages to survive though. But we're pretty geared. Like our Mage is like maybe 480, probably close to 480, high 470s item level. And that's still, like, he's got 595k health, and that trap still almost takes him completely down, right? So it's pretty important to dodge these at the higher levels. We have those Blind Rages, like I just stunned that one, that you gotta avoid. Some things, as a Shadow Priest, if you do end up getting caught in one of those traps, you can pop Dispersion, and you'll survive most likely, but on top of that, it'll stop you from being snared, so you could run away. Because one of the problems with the traps, especially with a pack like this, is if you get that Blind Rage on you like I just did, and you're snared, then you don't have any ways to run away from the guy, and he's going to come smack you in the face and you'll die. So if you pop Dispersion, you can run away. It removes movement impairing effects, so that's one thing to keep in mind. Okay, so now we're moving on to Eudora and Captain Jolly. The way we're going to play this is Captain Eudora. I have 550k health, because I'm only like 472 item level. So these powder shots, they will kill me. Like, probably, if not a one shot, it's like 90% of my health. So what I'm going to do is we're going to use this pillar to line of sight every powder shot. You can also use the pillar to line of sight the grape shots that go out across the thing, and that way you can just avoid 2 mechanics entirely. As long as Eudora doesn't jump to the far corner, which she will in this fight, you can just stand right here, do all your damage, and then dodge these cutting surges, dodge the whirlpool of blades or whatever, and then just stand behind this pillar whenever you get targeted with anything. That barrel over there that you can kind of see in the top left corner, a lot of people don't know, but he casts it and it does damage, so you want to avoid the AoE little swirly that he puts on the ground. But then after so he's doing it right now, he puts it on the ground, but then after it's on the ground, you can stand in the circle and it gives you like a 10% damage increase. So you want to avoid the initial hit, but then you want to get in it as soon as possible. That's the bad corner for her to jump to. See, right now I'm out of range to do like anything, so I'm trying to get close. But the problem is, if I get too close, I'll be out of position to line of sight the powder shot, and I'll just die. So I'm going to stay back a little bit. Our tank is pulling it back towards us so that we can do it. Powder shot goes on me, I line of sight, take no damage. And then, I held on to my azerite beam right there, because it wasn't worth me going out, like I was saying, to beam her, because I could potentially get hit by the powder shot. I'm reapplying my dots to Captain Jolly, even though the focus target for this fight is definitely Eudora. She's way more dangerous. So it's not a huge deal if you end up losing some uptime on your dots on Captain Jolly. You want to make sure they're 100% on Eudora. And Jolly is dangerous, but he's like a non-issue compared to Eudora. So you want to make sure you're keeping everything up on Eudora. And you can sacrifice some Jolly time for that. So, see, we get in here, it makes you a little big. You get that buff that looks like a keg on your thing. You get like a 10% damage increase. It works for the boss as well, so he's getting a 10% damage increase as well. But it's probably worth it to hold him in there for our DK, because our DK gets the 10% bonus increase. Really, you want to tank the boss just outside the circle and keep your whole team inside the circle. But it's not a huge deal with Jolly, I think. So right here I get 2 things from beyond in really bad timing. You can stun them and you can psychic scream, so I can avoid both of them. But those are pretty long cooldowns, so you can't do it very often. And my cape was already on cooldown. One thing I should mention, when you get targeted from a thing with a thing from beyond, if you tab target, if you're looking towards it and you tab target, it'll prioritize your thing from beyond. So you don't have to worry. Like if you have, like right here, we have 5 mobs that I'm looking at. If a thing from beyond spawned behind those mobs and started running at me, and I hit tab, it would automatically go to the thing from beyond, and it would skip all of these other mobs that it could tap target to. With this Beckoner of Chaos, Samrek or whatever, you can mask the spell to Fear. So that's one of the big things you want to do as a Shadow Priest. Is I usually do the first Fear. If you have a Resto Shaman, you can use whatever that totem is. What's the name of that totem? Anyway, you can use the totem. And if you have a monk, you can use Revival, and those will both get rid of these as well. If you have another priest even, they can get rid of these. But it helps, especially in a hierarchy like this where uptime is a huge deal. If you mass dispel everybody, then you have like 2 more seconds of hitting the boss that you wouldn't have typically. So I also pop Vampiric Embrace on this guy because the little ads that he spawns can do some pretty good damage. And if they end up hitting anyone but the tank, they can be pretty deadly, so it's nice to have a little extra AoE healing going out. Right here we're going to do a bunch of yellows with a bunch of elites. The one thing about bolstering that not everybody knows is yellow mobs will not bolster red mobs, and red mobs will not bolster yellow mobs. So you can pull yellows and reds together, and it's not a big deal. See, as you can see right there, the shipmates are dying, but the other guys still only have 1 stack of bolstering. So our mage combusted right there, and he pulled aggro, but luckily our tank was able to get it back. That's just what happens with skittish. A combusting fire mage is pretty hard to keep threat off of. So, and luckily fire mage has a lot of good ways to avoid getting one shot by all these guys. They can run away and blink and whatever. Okay, so right here we're going to pull another big pack. We're going to do a two-pack pull, I think, with this Irontide Crusher and the guys at the end of this bridge. Actually, maybe it's just a one-pack pull. Anyway, so in this, you have to be really careful because we have a Harpooner in this pack, as well as a Crusher. And if you're really unlucky, I mean, you have a couple other AoE abilities going off, like those Going Bananas. But if you're really unlucky, like I just was right there, the Crusher will cast Ground Shatter that does like the circle around him. And if you have a Harpooner who's standing on top of him, the Harpooner can harpoon you in and get you right into that Ground Shatter, and you just get destroyed. So you got to be really careful with this. If you get harpooned and you see that going off, it's probably worth dispersing, or you might die. The other thing that you have to keep in mind on a bolstering week like this is those Harpooners can get to the point where the Harpoon just one-shots people, which happens in this dungeon. You'll see in a couple seconds that we get the Harpooner pretty high, and he just one-shots me with his Harpoon. He almost one-shot our mage right there. Something else I should mention, on this pack, I'm focusing all of my damage into the Crusher, because the Crusher has way more health than anything else. This is the Harpoon that kills me. It's a 5 bolstered, 25 fortified Harpoon. Does like over 1 million damage probably. So right here, we're trying to res me inside the arena, but our Blood Death Knight has a worm, as you can see, that's in combat with that training dummy, and he can't cancel it, so they can't res me, so she has to come out of the arena. I think she could have stayed in there because the worm just despawned, but she came out anyway. You gotta be really careful, because if you start this turtle boss before everyone's in the arena, then you'll get the throw food debuff, and you'll die. Like, you can't survive that, so don't start this turtle boss unless everybody's in the arena. Something that you should be doing whenever you're in this arena and you're fighting the turtle boss, or you've cleared that pack by the dummies, is you want to dot the dummies, because you get, for every apparition that hits, a lot of people will flame you for padding, but it's not strictly padding, because every apparition that hits will give you 3 insanity. So your single target damage, which is what's important when you're fighting the turtle right here, your single target damage will increase if you just dot those 2 dummies, because your void forms will be able to go longer, and that equals more Course of Insanity stacks, and that's more haste, and it's just all around a good idea. Obviously, you don't want to be sending void bolts or your Shadow Word Voids or Mind Flays or anything into these dummies. As you can see, I just hit them with 2 Vampiric Touches because I'm running Misery. They get both dots, and then I just turn and go back to the boss. And then something else I should mention with these shells, if you stand towards the edge of the room, you're less likely to get hit by the shells, because every time a shell bounces, it goes through the middle of the room, which means if you're standing in the middle of the room, then every time a shell bounces, it's coming towards you. But if you're on the edge of the room, the shell has like a way lower chance of going directly towards your edge, right? So if you stand on the edge of the circle, you're less likely to get hit. Right here, you can see we have a 10-second break, so I'm getting my food buff. I'm letting those dots fall off. I'm going to want to build into my void form right here, so I'm hitting the dummies. The food buff is pretty important, like I said earlier. I pop void form. You can void erupt on these dummies, and you won't hit any trash or anything. We're pulling some yellows right here, so it's not a huge deal, but I mean, you should turn and focus these guys rather than the dummies, obviously. You want to make sure your dots are kept up on those dummies, and now we're just going into Trothak. So, some things to keep in mind with Trothak. Shadow Priests aren't great for the Sharks. You want to kind of stand exactly where I'm standing right here for as much of the fight as possible. But it's not always possible. Like right there, I would rather that Shark have gone on me than our mage, because he was combusting, and his combustion is way more damage than what I can do right here. But it goes on him, so I get to stay there and keep hitting the target dummies. If you stand right where I am right here, then you won't have any problem targeting those dummies and putting your dots on them. Right here, I'm baiting the Shark away from our mage into these blood pools. You got to be really careful as well, because if you let the shark get into melee, it can really cause havoc. So you want to, while you're baiting the shark, don't get too close to melee. Or if you do have to get close to melee, let them know that you're bringing a shark, and they can avoid stealing the aggro or whatever, so that they don't get eaten alive. I'm reapplying my dots there, just because, like I said earlier, it's a single target increase. One thing I should also mention is if you get over 100%, 140% haste, then so typically in your void form, you want to cast Void Bolt as often as possible, and then the second most important spell is Shadow Word Void, and then when you don't have either of those available, you want to cast Mind Flay, right? However, it's typically when you have low levels of haste, anything below 140%, you'll do Void Bolt and then two other spells, two other GCDs. So you'll go Void Bolt, maybe a Shadow Word Void, and then a Mind Flay while you wait for Void Bolt, like I just did, and then you'll shoot another Mind Flay. However, if you get above 140% haste, then you go from two GCDs to one GCD in between. So you can Void Bolt, Shadow Word Void, Void Bolt, Mind Flay, Void Bolt, rather than Void Bolt, Shadow Word Void, Mind Flay, Void Bolt. And that's just a small thing that you can do to increase the length of your void forms, which in turn, makes you do more damage overall. So that's a single target thing that you want to do as much as possible. I would recommend like a weak aura that shows your haste percentage or whatever, so that you can tell. My insanity bar in the middle there, the number on the left that says 87, 88, that's my haste percent. Although I don't look at that super often. I have the haste percentage in the bottom right corner as well. So if you keep an eye on that, like right now I'm at 130 or so. It's almost at the point where I can just do one GCD in between. But it doesn't matter so much because Trothak is dead. So now we're going to go do the obelisk. Something to keep in mind is that if you dot those training dummies at the very end of the fight, you can sometimes be stuck in combat. So you want to not dot those training dummies at the end of Trothak. When he gets like below 1,000,000 HP, you want to stop dotting them, because if you dot them, I think what happens is after Trothak dies, if you dot them again, you're stuck in combat until your dots fall off, and then you can't go into the obelisk for 30 seconds or so, and that's a really big deal. So you want to keep your dots on those, but then as soon as Trothak is about to die, let them fall off, because you want to get into this obelisk as fast as you can. With this obelisk, it's just the typical Breaker of Heroes. You just want to keep up with everybody, get off as many Void Bolts as you can, Shadow Word Void when you don't have a really long way to run. You can beam this guy, it's not such a big deal. Typically you want to save your beam for like big packs, right? But it's more important that you use as many beams as you can in the dungeon than it is to get the most out of every single beam. Obviously you want to get as much as you can out of every single beam, but it's more important to have, let's say, like 20 casts of your beam that are only 75% optimal. That's better than 10 casts of your beam that are 100% optimal. So you want to keep those big cooldowns like your beam on cooldown as much as possible. Obviously there are times where you can save it if you know like a really big pack is coming up and you have a really high crit or whatever, so you can just blast the pack. But that's one thing that you want to try to use more often is your beam. Okay, so we just killed Urgroth. Now we're going to go into Harlan Suite with the spider boss. So this can be pretty dangerous because on a 25 especially, we did a 25 Shrine of the Storm the other day, and the spider boss one-shot me through my power word shield. Granted, I don't have the best gear. I mean, I'm only 550k HP or so. But I had a shield on as well, so I was at least like 650k, and it still one-shot me. So it did like, I think over 1,000,000 damage or something. So you got to be really careful, especially on these really high keys. The other problem is we have two ranged, so some of these casts are going to go through. Like this one right here is going through, so I pop Dispersion, it hits, does like no damage. But then the second one is also going through, so our healer pops Aura of Sacrifice, so that I don't get one shot, and I pop my health pot as soon as I can, and I end up surviving. So now we're just on the last little bit. Harlan Suite is, easy fight. You just want to avoid the guys who are running in. Avoid the cannon barrages. For Shadow Priest, this isn't any different than for any other class, except you only have like 2 ways to take care of the guys who run in. Basically the same 2 ways that you take care of things from beyond, which is Psychic Scream and Psychic Horror. So we have these guys that are running in on these higher key levels will one-shot you, so it's very important that somebody takes care of them. Here in a bit, our mage has been taking care of them up until now, but here in a bit, our mage calls for somebody else to take care of it. So I run out there to ranged and I Psychic Horror him, and then that just gives us like 4 seconds to not worry about him, and then our Demon Hunter and our mage have time to Frost Nova and Fell Eruption it, and we can just completely ignore it. So something else to mention, Harlan's Suite, when he hits 30% HP, starts taking increased damage. So you can save your Azerite Beam or whatever for that if you want. That's more of a padding kind of thing though. Really, you want to try and get him down to 30% as fast as possible, because that's like the hardest part of the fight, because after 30% he just melts. So you want to use like all your big stuff before he gets to 30%, and then once he gets there, it's going to be easy. You just blast him. So right here is where our mage calls for somebody else to take care of it. So I stay at ranged rather than stacking in melee. I'm looking for him. I see him. I pop my Psychic Horror on him, and now I can just ignore him. And then it wears off. He gets Frost Nova'd. It's not a big deal. Other than that instance, though, you want to stand in melee for those cannon barrages. This one gets really scuffed because I was at ranged. Our Demon Hunter dashed to the side. Like, it's kind of a mess, but Harlan's already dead, so it doesn't matter. We have 59 seconds left, and we're missing like 7%. So luckily, there are these mobs over here that kill themselves. So you imprison the one on the bridge with our Demon Hunter, and then we want to not interrupt Painful Motivation. I'm focusing the Oarsman because that Sea Spout can be deadly, so I interrupt that. Otherwise, the Painful Motivation kills the mobs. We bring this guy in, and then we use him to kill these guys, and bada bing, bada boom, 25 Freehold, complete. So, that's basically the whole thing. If you have any questions or anything, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll put my talents and my essences and everything in the description. I hope to do more of these in the future, so stick around, subscribe. Thanks for watching.